Lonely rancher buys ranch for $12, then discovers Apache girl hunted for a hidden. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The desert was on fire with gun smoke and torchlight when I realized 12 cents had bought me more than cursed ground. It had bought me a war. The girl beside me, blood seeping through her buckskin, lifted her rifle with hands that did not tremble. And as the canyon walls echoed with the voices of men hunting us, I knew this land was not empty dirt. It was a secret worth killing for, and maybe worth dying for. But to understand how I came to that moment, you have to ride with me back a few weeks to the town of Red Hollow, New Mexico Territory, 1878. I came there with nothing but a tired horse, a revolver with more rust than shine, and a name I wasn't proud to carry, Jonathan Jonah Miller. Once I had scouted for the Union Army and then for the 7th Cavalry. I knew trails and rivers better than most men knew their own families. But the same trails that fed my life's bread had also carried me into villages where flames rose and children cried. I had walked away with medals and pay in my pocket, but my soul was scorched black. The Indian Wars left me breathing, but less than alive. For 2 decades I rode like a ghost from one frontier town to another, whiskey in my blood, regret in my shadow. I wasn't searching for a new life. I was searching for a quiet corner to finish the old one. That's what brought me to the courthouse steps of Red Hollow on a wind-scoured morning when the whole town had gathered, not to celebrate, but to whisper. An auctioneer stood before a parcel of land just outside town. He spoke the numbers with a voice dry as chalk. 12 acres, red rock, sun-baked, barren. Opening bid, 12 cents. The crowd shuffled, but nobody stepped forward. They called it cursed land. Folks muttered of strange disappearances, of a sun that never touched the canyon floor, of bones buried where no grass grew. Some claimed even the Apache wouldn't set foot there, saying the land itself carried a sickness. I listened, and something in me recognized the words. Cursed land for a cursed man. That felt about right. My hand rose before my brain caught up, and my voice, cracked and raw from dust and whiskey, broke the silence. 12 cents! Every head turned. No envy in their eyes, only pity and a quiet sort of fear. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp thud. In that instant, the land was mine. Not a cheer, not a clap. Only murmurs moving through the crowd like a snake in dry grass. Poor fool, someone whispered. That land will bury him. Maybe that's what I wanted. I swung into the saddle and rode out under a sky white as bone, the deed tucked in my vest. Each mile of dust and scrub felt like a prayer I didn't know how to speak. But even then, some verse I'd once heard in a tent preacher's sermon whispered against my ribs. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Isaiah 1:18. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but I carried it anyway, the way a dying man might carry one last canteen into the desert. The trail out to my new claim threaded through country that looked more like a scar than a home. Canyons split the earth wide, their walls bleeding red under the high sun. Sagebrush clawed at the wind, and the silence pressed heavy, too heavy, as though even the coyotes held their breath. The farther I rode, the more it felt like the world itself was watching, waiting to see what a man like me would do with 12 acres of nothing. My horse snorted uneasily, ears flicking at sounds I couldn't catch. I told myself it was just the heat playing tricks. But when the air goes still in a desert, a man learns to listen. That's when I saw her. At first, it was the horse that caught my eye. A painted mare hobbled in the thin shade of a rock lip, sides heaving, foam dried white at her jaw. Cruel work. Whoever left her like that wasn't far. I dismounted, palm brushing the worn handle of my Colt, old instincts stirring like snakes in dry grass. Then came the sound, a cough, ragged and thin, slipping out from a narrow crease in the canyon wall. I froze, the kind of stillness you learn on battlefields. My boots sank into red sand as I eased closer, every step careful. A pair of eyes found me from the shadows, black and sharp as obsidian. She was crouched low, a Winchester tight to her shoulder, barrel steady despite the tremor in her body. Blood darkened the side of her buckskin tunic, spreading like a slow fire. Young, maybe 20 at most, but fierce. Apache. I lifted both hands, empty. My voice came low, the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. I won't hurt you. Her English was clipped, hard-edged. Go, not yours. I should have. Lord knows I'd walked away from more than one bleeding soul in my time. But something in those eyes held me fast. Maybe it was the way she clung to that rifle, not with fear, but with a resolve I recognized, the same kind that had kept me alive long after I wanted to quit. Slowly, I unhooked the cowhide canteen from my belt and set it down between us. She watched me like a hawk, then snatched it in a swift motion, drinking in small, careful sips, as though each drop might cut her throat. That's when I noticed the pouch at her belt, woven tight, beaded with a pattern of water flowing between two serpents. Not a trinket, a mark, a responsibility. This girl wasn't just wounded, she was carrying something worth bleeding for. The sun dipped lower, setting the canyon walls aflame. I leaned back against the rock, the weight of the land pressing on me. I didn't know her name or why she was here, but I knew one thing. 12 cents hadn't bought me cursed crowned. It had bought me into her fight. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments. The fire in the canyon had faded to embers by the time I saw it properly. Not her rifle, not the wound at her ribs, but the pouch tied tight against her belt. It was small, made of buckskin, edged with beadwork in colors that caught what little light was left. 2 serpents wound across it, facing each other over a line of blue beads that shimmered like running water. I'd seen plenty of beadwork in my time, but nothing like that. It wasn't decoration. It was a mark, a duty. My eyes lingered too long. "Not yours," she said, her voice thin but hard as stone. Her hand brushed the pouch, the way a man might rest his palm on a family Bible. I raised my hands again, same as before. "I don't want it." "You look," she snapped. "That enough." For a moment we just sat there, the desert night breathing around us. The canyon walls glowed faintly in the moonlight, scarlet rock turned silver. Somewhere an owl called. Everything else was still, as though the world itself had settled to watch us measure one another. I should have walked away. Any man with sense would have. She was wounded, I was tired, and the land between us was nothing but dry stone and shadow. But the beads had struck something in me, something I couldn't name. The blow line shimmered like a memory of water, and my throat burned at the thought. "Why guard it?" I asked finally, voice rough. She fixed those dark eyes on me, steady despite the pain in her side. "Because this land is not curse, it is life." The words cut clean through me. I had heard too many campfire tales about cursed valleys, places the sun refused to touch, ghosts that walked at night. But life, that was a different story. "What kind of life?" I asked, though the question felt dangerous even as it left my mouth. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wouldn't give me more, not yet. But she leaned forward, the effort pulling at her wound, and tapped the ground with her fingers. "Stone remembers," she whispered. "It carries the voices of the old ones. You hear it if you listen." Her hand stayed there, palm against the canyon floor, as if drawing strength. I followed suit without thinking, resting my own palm against the rock. It was cool, faintly damp. The desert wasn't supposed to feel that way. A shiver moved up my spine. She pulled back and adjusted the rifle across her lap. Her eyes never left mine. "Go now," she said. "Leave this place. Leave me." And I almost did. But when I looked at her, leaning against the stone with blood staining her side, clutching that pouch like it held the weight of the world, I knew I couldn't. Whatever secret this land carried, whatever curse the town whispered about, it had already wrapped its claws around me. The night had barely settled before the sound of hooves rolled through the canyon like distant thunder. My horse shifted, ears pinned back. Tala stiffened, rifle lifting, though her wound made the barrel tremble. I knew that rhythm. Men riding in formation, careful but confident. Not drifters, not farmers. Guns for hire. A column of riders emerged from the shadows, their dust coats pale in the moonlight, their hats pulled low. No badges glinted on their chests, but their hands rested easy on their holsters, like men who'd already weighed the cost of killing and found it cheap. At their head rode a man who didn't belong to the desert at all. His coat was black broadcloth, clean even after the ride. His boots polished. His face pale against the dust, sharp as a hawk's beak. He drew up his horse and let his gaze sweep over me, then past me, toward the crevice where Tala sat hidden. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice smooth, polished, the kind you'd hear behind a banker's desk. "The new owner himself, Jonah Miller." I didn't answer. My hand rested near my colt, but not on it. He tipped his hat slightly, mock courtesy. "Barrett Cole. I'll save us all some time. I'll give you $1,000 for that patch of dirt. Right now. No questions. No hard feelings." $1,000! My gut clenched. For a man with nothing but a worn-out horse and a pocket full of regrets, it was a fortune. Enough to buy comfort, whiskey, maybe even peace. But his eyes betrayed him. Cold, flat, rattlesnake eyes. A man who never paid more than what he stood to gain tenfold. Behind him, his riders sat silent, waiting. They weren't here to bargain, they were here to enforce. I shook my head slowly. Not for sale. The smile peeled from his face by degrees. He studied me as though weighing how much rope it would take to hang me. "You don't understand," he said softly. "That land isn't cursed by stories or shadows. The curse is ours. We put it there to keep fools away, and now you've gone and planted yourself right in the middle of it." His horse sidestepped, restless under the pressure in his voice. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing to slits. "You just made the worst mistake of your life, Miller. We'll be back to collect what's ours, and next time we won't be asking." He wheeled his horse with crisp precision. The column turned as one, dust rising behind them until the canyon swallowed them whole again. The silence they left behind was heavier than the threat itself. I stood there in the moonlight, the echo of his words tight in my chest. I'd spent 20 years running from ghosts, from the sins that clawed at my sleep. But this was no ghost. It was flesh and blood, greed on horseback. I looked toward the crevice where Tala still watched, rifle steady. Her eyes met mine, dark and unblinking. "You see now," she said, her voice a rasp. "They want what is not theirs. They kill for it. They kill you." "They kill me!" I had no answer, not yet. Only the cold certainty that 12 cents had bought me more than land. It had bought me into a war I could no longer walk away from. The rider's dust hadn't yet settled when Tala shifted, her face drawn with pain, but her eyes still hard as obsidian. She eased herself forward, pressing a hand against her wound to steady it. "You wonder why they come," she said, her English clipped and heavy. "I tell you." I crouched nearby, not too close, not too far. The desert air was cooling, but the tension between us burned hotter than the noon sun. She untied the beaded pouch with careful fingers, as though handling something sacred. When she opened it, no gold coin spilled out. No jewels, just a pinch of pale sand and a few smooth stones, river-worn and glinting faintly in the firelight. I frowned. That's what they want? Her head shook once. Not stone, not sand, water. She touched her chest, then pressed the stones back into the pouch. The spring runs under this land. Old water, strong water. My people live because of it. The word spring hit me harder than any bullet. In the desert, water is life. Rivers shift, wells dry, but a spring, steady, hidden, was worth more than gold. A man could build a town on it. A railroad could cross half the territory if it had the water to feed its engines. And suddenly, Cole's offer of $1,000 made sense. It wasn't generosity, it was theft, written neat and clean. They say curse, Tala went on, her breath catching, but curse is lie. White men make lie. They write paper. They say spring is theirs. They make my people small, hungry, weak. I looked down at the deed folded in my vest pocket. 12 cents. A price so cheap it was laughable, unless the real aim was to make it look legal when Cole's men took the land by force. My jaw tightened. I remembered dim lamplight in army tents, officers leaning over maps, lawyers with ink-stained fingers drafting orders that turned villages into battlefields. They had called it progress, civilization. But looking into Tala's eyes, I saw the truth plain as day. It had always been about paper covering blood. "You're telling me my deed's a trick?" I said, voice low. Her eyes burned. "It is trap. They buy the clerk, they buy the sheriff, they buy all. But not me." She pressed her palm to the ground again. "Stone remembers. It carries voices of the old ones. They say, hold this land or die with it." The canyon seemed to hum under my boots, as though the rock itself agreed with her. For years I had thought of curses as shadows chasing me from battlefield to battlefield. But this land's curse was different. It wasn't supernatural. It was man-made, written in ledgers, carried on horseback, enforced with rifles. And I, Jonah Miller, was tangled in it now. By dawn, her breathing had turned shallow, each inhale a fight against the wound that bled slow but steady. I tore a strip from my shirt, soaked it with the last of my water, and pressed it against her ribs. She didn't flinch, didn't whimper, just fixed her eyes on the horizon as though she could will herself to heal. "You should have left me," she said finally, her words dry as dust. "Maybe," I admitted. My hands were steady, but my chest wasn't. "But I didn't." She turned her gaze to me then, sharp, measuring. "Why? You do not know me. You owe nothing." I tied the cloth tight, knotting it just below her ribs. The blood slowed. My throat felt raw when I answered. "Because if I leave again, there'll be nothing left of me." The words surprised me as much as her. I'd spent years riding away from burning villages, from children's cries that chased me into sleep. I'd told myself distance would dull the sound, but it never had. It only hollowed me out more. She watched me for a long time. The mistrust in her eyes hadn't vanished, but it had cooled, like iron taken off the fire. "You stay, they kill you," she said flatly. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my torn shirt. Maybe they will, but running hasn't kept me alive, not really. The canyon wind moved between us, carrying the scent of sage and stone. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. Her eyes softened just a fraction. "You are strange man, Jonah Miller." I almost laughed. Stranger than most, maybe. The truth was, I didn't understand it myself. But as I looked at her, young, wounded, yet carrying the burden of a people on her shoulders, I felt something stir in me I thought was long dead. A choice. A line I could cross or walk away from again. And somewhere in that stillness, a verse I'd heard years ago in a chaplain's tent returned to me, clear as a bell. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Matthew 16:25. I had never understood it. I thought it was meant for preachers and martyrs, not men with blood on their hands. But kneeling in the dirt beside Talanez, I began to see. If I kept running, I'd already lost my life. But if I stayed, if I chose to fight, even for something not mine, maybe I'd find what was left of it. The sun crept higher, painting the canyon walls in fire. She leaned back against the stone, eyes closing, but her hand rested over the beaded pouch, as if to say, "This is what matters." I sat beside her in silence. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't planning where to run. I was planning where to stand. By mid-morning, the heat pressed down like a forge, and the silence in the canyon felt sharper than gunmetal. I knew it wouldn't last. Men like Barrett Cole didn't make idle threats. When he said he'd be back, he meant with more guns, more fire, and no patience left for bargains. That left us little time.
I gathered what I had: a Colt with 6 rounds, 4 more in the belt, a Winchester with maybe a dozen shells, 2 knives, a painted mare too tired to carry us far. Against a dozen rifles, maybe more, it wasn't much. But the desert had always taught me this truth: sometimes it isn't about what you have, but how you use it. I scratched lines in the sand with a broken stick, laying out the canyon in rough shape. "They'll come through here first," I said, marking the narrow mouth. "Easy to choke us with fire. But if we pull back, use the bends, we can turn the rock into a second gun." Tala crouched opposite me, her dark eyes sharp despite the bandage at her side. She shook her head. "You think like soldier, too straight. You hear stone." She pressed her ear to the canyon floor, then tapped lightly. The sound traveled, echoing strange, multiplying. "Stone carries voices. We use that." I leaned back, listening as she showed me. Even the lightest tap doubled itself, bouncing through cracks and hollows until it sounded like something alive. A grin tugged at the corner of my mouth despite myself. "Echoes make them think more rifles than we got." She nodded once. "They fear ghosts."
We give them ghosts. So it went, my hands shaping defenses I'd once taught green recruits, her instincts guiding where the land itself could fight for us. I showed her how to angle fire so bullets sparked off stone, making 3 shots sound like 10. She showed me which ledges caught wind, where voices carried truest. The more we worked, the more the line between us thinned. She spoke little, but when she did, it was sure and steady. And when our eyes met over the crude map, I saw something shift. Not trust, not yet, but a flicker of recognition. As if she understood I wasn't just staying for the land anymore. By afternoon, the shadows began to stretch, long fingers creeping up the rock. My gut told me we had hours at best before Cole returned, maybe less. I checked the Colt again, rolling the cylinder. 6 chambers, 6 chances. I'd fought battles with more men at my side, more rifles, more certainty, and lost. This time, there was no certainty, only a choice. Taylor watched me, then placed her hand flat on the sand between us. "Stone remembers," she said softly. "It will remember you, too." The words settled heavy, but not like a curse, like a promise. The canyon wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of dust and sweat. Riders would come soon. We had little left to prepare. But as I met Tala's gaze across the fire-lit dust, I realized we had something I hadn't carried in years: the will to stand. Night fell heavy, the stars sharp as broken glass above the canyon. Our small fire crackled low, giving just enough warmth to fight the chill. Shadows clung to the red walls around us, turning the place into a cathedral of stone. Tala sat across from me, her rifle within reach, the beaded pouch resting against her side. She hadn't spoken in a while, just stared into the flames, as if listening to voices I couldn't hear. The silence pressed on me until it broke something loose inside. I reached for the tin cup, poured the last of the coffee, and found my hand trembling. "You ought to know," I said, the words dragging like chains. "About me." Her eyes flicked up, dark and steady. She didn't speak, so I went on. "I wasn't just a scout for the army. I rode with the 7th Cavalry. I drew maps, marked trails. I led them where they wanted to go." My throat tightened. Villages, camps, people who never raised a rifle.
I showed the way. The fire popped. My chest burned hotter than the embers. I heard the orders: destroy, burn, leave nothing. And I carried them out. Families ran, but soldiers rode faster. When dawn came, the smoke stayed. And I stayed too, long enough to know every cry, every face. My voice cracked, and I forced it lower. That's who I was. That's the blood I carry. And you deserve to know it, because men like me, we made your people ghosts. For a long time she didn't move. The flames painted her face in copper and shadow. Her fingers brushed the beaded pouch, slow and deliberate. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I have seen many men with blood on their hands. Few speak it. Fewer still face it." Her gaze didn't waver. "You are not the same man you were then." The words cut deeper than any bullet. They stripped me bare, left me sitting in the ashes of who I had been. And for the first time in 20 years, the weight eased. Just a hair, just enough to breathe. I bowed my head, unable to meet her eyes. "You're kinder than I deserve." She shook her head once. "Not kindness, truth. Stone remembers, yes, but stone also endures."
"You endure." We sat in silence after that, the fire whispering low. I felt her words settle inside me, not as forgiveness, I didn't deserve that, but as something close to it, a seed. Above us, the desert sky stretched wide and merciless. But for the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone beneath it. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. By late afternoon, the canyon lay in shadow. The red stone turned the color of dried blood. My skin prickled before I even heard the hooves. The kind of silence that falls when trouble is coming. It pressed on my chest until I could barely breathe. Tala caught it too. She lifted her head, her dark hair falling across her face, and said one word: "They." The first rider appeared at the canyon mouth, torch in one hand, rifle in the other. Then came another, and another, until the whole column poured in. 12 men, maybe more. At their head, Barrett Cole sat tall in his saddle, his coat neat despite the dust. His voice carried, smooth as a banker's promise. "Smoke them out." The order slid across the stone like a blade.
His men dismounted, piling brush and kindling at the mouth of the canyon. The crackle of fire followed, sharp and eager. Smoke coiled upward, thick and dark, already curling toward the narrow cut where Tala and I crouched. She pressed a cloth against her mouth, eyes narrowing. My hand hovered over the Colt, but bullets wouldn't save us from fire. "Wait," I whispered. The first rider edged forward, testing the ground. His torch flickered against the stone, shadows jumping like restless spirits. I raised the Colt, but Tala's hand caught my wrist. She shook her head once, then touched the canyon wall with her palm. "Not yet," she breathed. The rider stepped closer. The smoke thickened, scratching my lungs raw. I sighted along the Colt's barrel, my finger tightening. Then Tala whispered, "Now." Her rifle cracked. The rider toppled backward, torch flying. I fired a half a breath later, the Colt bucking in my hand. The shot slammed into the canyon wall, sparking, and the sound leapt into the stone like thunder. One shot became 3, then 5. The canyon magnified the echoes until it seemed a regiment was waiting in the rocks. Horses reared, men cursed, firing blind into the shadows.
I fired again, the bullet screaming off stone. The echoes rolled like a storm. Cole shouted orders, his smooth voice strained now, but the men were rattled. Fear twisted their faces in the firelight, their eyes darting to every crack in the rock. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd break. The fire roared higher, smoke rolling toward us. Tala pulled the cloth tighter over her face, coughed hard, then steadied the Winchester again. We'd bought breaths, no more. But sometimes breaths decide battles. The air turned black with smoke, bitter as burnt mesquite. My eyes watered, lungs clawing for breath. The Colt felt heavier with every shot, the echoes still ricocheting through the canyon walls like the voices of ghosts. Then the crack came, sharp, hot, before I even saw the muzzle flash. Pain tore through my thigh, dropping me to one knee. The Colt clattered against the stone. My vision narrowed to firelight and shadows. I bit back a curse, pressing my hand to the wound. Warm blood seeped fast, too fast. The canyon tilted under me. I'd taken worse before, but never with so little room left to run.
Tala slid beside me, her face streaked with soot, the cloth at her mouth blackened. She didn't flinch at the sight of blood. Instead, she shoved the Winchester into my hands, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from fury. "Fight!" she rasped. One word, that was all, but it carried the weight of every mile she had walked, every drop of blood her people had shed. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. I met her eyes, and something inside me shifted. All those years of running, of leaving others to carry the cost, slammed into me at once. This time I wasn't alone, and this time I couldn't walk away. My hands wrapped around the Winchester's worn stock. The wood felt alive, thrumming with her strength. I chambered around, teeth gritted against the pain in my leg, and leaned into the stone. The first shot cracked. The canyon gave it back a dozen times louder, a chorus of fire. A rider spun from his saddle, hitting the ground hard. The others hesitated, eyes wide, as if the rocks themselves had come alive with gunfire. I fired again, the recoil jolting through my chest. Beside me, Tala reloaded with quick, efficient motions, her face set in grim resolve.
A bullet sparked against the stone inches from her head. She didn't blink. We worked as one, me firing from cover, her guiding where the echoes would strike truest. Every shot we took bought us another breath, another heartbeat. But the smoke kept crawling in, thick and merciless. My wound burned like fire, each movement tearing at the flesh. I could feel my strength leaking out with the blood, and still her word echoed in my skull, "Fight." So I did. I sighted down the Winchester again, breath ragged, heart hammering. The rider at the canyon bend raised his torch high, ready to throw it into our hiding place. I squeezed the trigger. The torch fell, flames sputtering against the sand. The canyon swallowed the sound of my shot, then threw it back like thunder. For the first time since Cole's men had ridden in, I saw doubt in their faces. And for the first time in 2 decades, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Not victory, not yet, but the will to stand. The smoke was closing in, turning every breath into fire. My legs screamed with each step, and the ground beneath me blurred red and black. We couldn't hold the canyon mouth any longer.
Tala grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a fissure in the wall. To me it looked like nothing, just a crack too narrow for a man. But she pressed her hand to the stone, whispered something I couldn't catch, and then slipped sideways into the dark. I followed, dragging my wounded leg. The rocks scraped my shoulders, tore at my coat. For a moment the smoke vanished, swallowed by cool, damp air. My lungs drank it in like salvation. The passage opened suddenly, spedding us into a chamber carved by water long gone. The walls glistened faintly, streaked with white mineral veins that shimmered like bone. 3 narrow tunnels branched ahead, black as a preacher's Bible. Tala moved without hesitation, choosing the left-hand path. Her hand brushed the stone as she walked, steadying herself, listening. "Old ones built this," she said over her shoulder. "When soldiers came, they hid here. Stone remembers."
Behind us, Cole's men shouted, their voices muffled by smoke. A shot cracked, the sound bouncing along the tunnels until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Horses screamed somewhere outside. My hand tightened on the Winchester.
My heart hammered with the same rhythm as the echoes, a pounding that filled my skull. And then, unbidden, words I hadn't thought of in years rose up in me like water from a hidden well. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23:4. The verse settled over me like a cloak. Not a shield, not a promise of survival, but a reminder I wasn't walking alone. I limped after Tala, every step a test of will. The tunnel twisted, narrowed, then widened again into another cavern. Drops of water fell from the ceiling, slow and steady, each one echoing louder than gunfire. She knelt by a trickle of moisture running along the wall, cupped her hands and drank. Then she pushed the water toward me. "Life," she whispered, "always life here." I drank, the coolness cutting through smoke and blood. For the first time in hours I could think beyond the next breath. Then the echoes came again, boots scuffing stone, voices barking orders. Cole's men were inside now, hunting us in the maze. Tala rose, rifle steady. "We move," she said. I nodded, shifting the Winchester against my shoulder, pain flaring sharp in my leg. The fear was still there, coiled tight in my gut. But the verse echoed louder, "I will fear no evil." The maze had become our battlefield, and for the first time I believed we had a chance. The tunnels breathed with a life of their own. Every drip of water, every scuff of a boot multiplied until it sounded like an army moving through the dark. Cole's men cursed, their voices chasing themselves down 100 stone throats. Tala motioned me low against the wall. Her hand rested flat against the rock, her ear tilted as if she could hear something more than sound, something older. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, and she pointed toward a narrow side cut. I trusted her. We slipped into the shadows, crouching low. My wounded leg burned, but adrenaline drove me forward. I braced the Winchester, waiting. The first rider blundered into the cavern, torchlight shaking. He muttered something, his words torn apart by echoes. Behind him, 2 more followed, rifles raised, swinging at ghosts in the dark. Tala gave a quick nod. I squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked, slamming into the rock above their heads. Sparks flew, and the canyon did the rest. The single report shattered into thunder, rolling from wall to wall until it sounded like a dozen rifles opening fire. The men panicked. One fired into the shadows, the muzzle flash blinding him more than it helped. Another stumbled back, colliding with his own partner. The torch dropped, sputtered, and went out. "They think we are many," Tala whispered, voice fierce. I chambered another round, teeth gritted against the pain in my leg. Let's keep them thinking that. We moved again, slipping through the labyrinth. Twice we lay flat as riders passed above, dust sifting down onto our faces. Twice more we set the echoes against them, turning their nerves tighter with every false shot. But it wasn't just trickery. There was something deeper in the way Tala moved. Her hand brushing the stone, her body tilting as though guided by more than instinct. She was listening to the land, reading it like scripture. At one point we paused in a chamber streaked with white mineral veins. Tala knelt, her fingers tracing a soot-black handprint on the wall. Her voice softened. "My grandmother hid here. Soldiers passed above, never found her. Stone remembers. It keeps us still." Her words settled into me like a truth I hadn't known I was thirsty for. A shout echoed from the tunnels, Cole's voice, sharp and commanding. "Push them forward! Don't let them slip!" The spell broke. Tala rose, rifle at the ready. I tightened my grip on the Winchester. We weren't ghosts. We were 2 battered souls, cornered in the belly of the earth. But with every step deeper into that maze, I felt less like a hunted man and more like a part of something bigger. The land wasn't just shelter. It was fighting with us. The maze spat us out into a wide chamber, its roof arching high, the walls scarred with soot and old mineral veins. Torches hissed in the damp air. And there he was,
Barrett Cole stood in the center, his coat torn, dust streaking his fine shirt. Sweat ran down his face, but his eyes were cold, calculating. 2 men flanked him, rifles raised. The rest had scattered in the tunnels, lost in the echoes. "You should have taken the money, Miller," Cole said, his voice steady despite the chaos. 12 cents wasn't worth your life. My leg throbbed, every heartbeat pumping fire through the wound. The Winchester felt heavy, almost slipping from my hands. Tala moved beside me, her rifle aimed, but her breath was ragged. This was the moment. No more running, no more echoes, just flesh against flesh. I lowered the Winchester deliberately, letting it clatter against the stone. Cole's eyes narrowed in surprise, then sharpened as he pulled his pistol. I didn't wait. With a burst of pain that nearly blacked my vision, I lunged forward. My shoulder slammed into him, and we both crashed to the ground. His pistol fired wild, the shot sparking harmlessly against the wall. We grappled, fists striking, bones meeting stone. His elbow caught my ribs, stealing my breath. My knuckles split against his jaw. The taste of blood filled my mouth. He was fast, fueled by rage, but I carried years of anger, years of guilt turned into steel. Every blow I landed wasn't just for me. It was for the villages burned, for the children's cries that still haunted me, for Tala's people who carried wounds deeper than mine. At last, my fist found his jaw hard enough to drop him. His body sagged, breath rasping. My Colt lay nearby, gleaming in the torchlight. I picked it up, leveled it at his chest. One squeeze, and it would end.
He stared up at me, lips split, eyes burning with venom. "Do it," he hissed. "You're no better than me if you don't." For a heartbeat, I wanted to. Every bone in my body screamed for justice. But then I felt Tala's gaze on me, steady, silent, weighing. Not pleading, not demanding, just watching, the way stone watches centuries pass. And I heard again the verse that had followed me into the tunnels. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." My finger trembled. Then I lowered the Colt. Instead, I pulled a strip of rawhide from my belt and bound his wrists, knotting it tight. He wasn't a king anymore. He wasn't even a threat. Just a man, stripped of the power greed had given him. Mercy wasn't for his sake. It was the last stitch my soul needed. I rose, breathing hard, blood running down my leg, and looked at Tala. For the first time since I'd laid 12 cents on cursed ground, I felt like more than a ghost. The chamber rang with silence after the fight, broken only by the drip of water along the stone and the rasp of Cole's breath. His wrists bound, his pistol lying useless in the dust, he no longer looked like the man who had ridden into the canyon with the arrogance of a king. The echoes of his men still drifted through the tunnels, panic, confusion, boots retreating into the dark. Without their leader's command, fear had scattered them like dry leaves in a storm. Tala lowered her rifle at last, the barrel trembling from exhaustion. Her face was streaked with soot, her wound seeping through the bandage, but her eyes burned steady as bedrock. She looked at me, then at Cole, and gave a single nod. "It is done," she said. But it didn't feel done, not yet. My chest heaved, my leg throbbed, and somewhere deep inside, the old ghost still stirred. I looked down at Cole, at the man who had spun lies of curses to cover his theft, who had turned water into profit and men into weapons. "This was never about land," I said, my voice raw. "It was about control." Cole spat blood, sneering even in defeat. "You think you've won, Miller? Men like me never lose. The law is mine. The paper is mine. The sheriff, the clerk, the judge, they all carry my coin. You'll hang before you ever drink from that spring."
I stared at him, the Colt still heavy in my hand though the fight was finished. Once I might have believed him. Once I would have seen only the weight of his power. But not now. "Paper burns," I said quietly. "Stone remembers." Tala's lips curved, not in a smile, but in recognition. Her people had carried that truth long before I spoke it. I holstered the Colt, the decision final. Cole would face the town, the sheriff, and the truth. Not my bullet. The torchlight flickered across the chamber, glinting off the pool at its center. Silver water shimmered in the dark, feeding the veins of the rock, the lifeblood of this so-called cursed land. I knelt, cupping it in my hands. Cool, pure, steady. It hit me then. The curse had never been the land. It was greed. Greed that dried up hearts, that turned men into liars and killers, that wrote curses into deeds and called it law. The land itself was blessing. I drank deep, the water cutting through smoke and blood, washing something clean inside me I thought beyond saving. When I looked up, Tala was watching. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me what words could not. For the first time in decades, I wasn't running, I was standing. We rose together, the bound man between us, and stepped back into the tunnels. The echoes no longer sounded like ghosts. They sounded like the future, waiting. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. We rode slow into Red Hollow at dawn. Cole slumped between us, his wrists bound, his face swollen from the fight. The desert behind us carried the smoke of battle, but the town ahead lay quiet, shutters closed, streets empty. Word travels faster than horses. By the time we reached Main Street, heads turned from windows, doors cracked open, and whispers rose like dust devils. The same townsfolk who had once muttered about curses now stared with wide eyes at the sight before them. Barrett Cole, the man who bought lawmen and clerks like cattle, dragged in chains. We stopped in front of the sheriff's office. The badge on his chest was tarnished, but his eyes were clear, hard, with years of watching truth and lies tangle. He stepped out onto the porch, squinting at the scene. "Miller?" he said slowly, as if weighing the name for the first time. His gaze dropped to Cole, who glared up from the saddle, rawhide biting his wrists. "What's this?" "The curse you've all been living under," I answered, swinging down stiffly. My wounded leg buckled, but I caught myself on the stirrup. False deeds, bribed officials, a spring buried under lies. Cole's been buying your town one signature at a time. The sheriff's jaw worked as though grinding stone. Behind him, 2 deputies stepped forward, hands uncertain near their holsters. Cole sneered, his voice hoarse but sharp. "You gonna listen to this drifter, Sheriff? A killer? A deserter? A nobody? I own this town. You wear my coin on your belt every day." The crowd thickened behind us, whispers swelling. For years, Cole's shadow had stretched over Red Hollow. Now, bound and bloodied, he looked smaller than he ever had. The sheriff's eyes lingered on him, then flicked to me. For a heartbeat, I saw doubt. Then something else. Relief, maybe? Resolve. "Not any more," the sheriff said. His voice carried steady as a church bell. He nodded to the deputies. "Take him." The deputies hesitated, then obeyed. Rawhide scraped against Cole's wrists as they hauled him down, ignoring his curses. The crowd shifted, whispers giving way to low, astonished murmurs. I reached into my vest and pulled out the deed, the slip of paper that had sold me into this fight for 12 cents. I held it up for all to see. "This is what he used to steal your land, your water, your lives. A curse written in ink." My voice roughened, but curses can burn. I struck a match against the porch rail and touched it to the paper. Flames licked it quick, devouring the lie until only ash fell between my fingers. The crowd gasped, then grew still. Tala stood at my side, her shoulders squared despite the wound, the beaded pouch resting against her hip. The people looked at her, some with awe, some with unease. She met their eyes without fear, without apology. The sheriff's gaze moved from her to me, then back to the man chained at his feet. "You've done what I couldn't," he said quietly. "Maybe what I should have done long ago." I shook my head. We just stood where the land told us to. For a long moment, silence held. Then a woman stepped forward, pressing a loaf of bread into Tala's hands. Another offered water. A man tipped his hat to me, his eyes no longer pitying, but steady with respect. The tide had shifted. The town of Red Hollow had seen its master in chains, and in that vision they found their own freedom. But I knew freedom was only the beginning. The real fight, the one against greed, corruption, and forgetting, would stretch long beyond us. Still, for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I'd stood on the right side of a line. Maybe that's what the frontier was always about. Not the gunfights or the gold, but the choices that carved a soul. To stand or to run, to take or to protect, to hold the past in shame, or to let it forge a better tomorrow. When I look back on Red Hollow, I see more than a battle won. I see how mercy can weigh heavier than vengeance, how the land itself teaches us that what endures is not greed, but grace. And maybe, friend, that truth belongs not just to Jonah Miller and Tala Nez, but to all of us. Because in our own lives, don't we all face canyons of shadow and echoes of regret? And don't we all long for the courage to stand, to forgive, to begin again? If this story stirred something in you, subscribe now and ride with us through more true Wild West stories, tales of love, loss, and redemption that remind us what really matters.